One of the things I would like to talk about on this channel is the subject of the end of the age. And we're going to be looking at that a little bit more next week. But before we get there, I want to take a minute and kind of address the theological elephant in the room related to God's judgment. And this can be a tough topic for us, especially those of us who grew up in the Protestant tradition, where we are really sold on the idea of God being a God who forgives. He gives us grace by faith. We're saved not because we're righteous at all, but because He's merciful and He sent His Son. And so it's hard to see how God's judgment fits in that framework. A lot of us have trouble with this already, just as it pertains to the Old Testament. I remember I grew up Christian, and I would go on stints of really trying to read the Bible because I knew that good Christians read the Bible, and, I kind of read the same stories that I was already familiar with a bunch of times, and okay, well, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to go to these books in the Old Testament that I haven't really read before. And I'd make it a little way into them and just be like, what is going on? Because I went to church every week. I went to Sunday school every week, and I heard a lot about the God who loves me. And I heard a lot about how, because Jesus died on the cross, God doesn't have to punish me for my sins. And I was really comfortable with that idea. And now I'm looking at the Old Testament where He's talking about dashing the nations to pieces or trampling them like a winepress. He talks about His mighty hand and His outstretched arm and fury poured out, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. This doesn't sound like the God I know. Now, when we get a little older and perhaps a little less honest with ourselves, it's easy to kind of push that behind us, like, okay, that's Old Testament stuff. I mean, that was really intense, but that's Israel. Most of us are Gentiles, so we don't have to deal with that one. We're all in the New Covenant, so all that Old Testament stuff doesn't really apply anymore, right? God's not angry anymore, or, maybe He does still get angry, but there's the cross, so, He practically doesn't get angry as it concerns me, and we just don't know how to deal with what seem like two conflicting sides of God. Is God kind and merciful and eager to forgive us, or is He ready to, destroy the nations who rebel against Him? There's a scholar named A.W. Tozer who has an excellent book that I'd highly recommend called The Knowledge of the Holy. I'll put a link to it in the description. And in this book, he has this quote that I think is so helpful for wrestling through this kind of stuff. God does not suspend one attribute to exercise another. Well, what does that mean? That means that God doesn't stop being the God of justice in order to be the God of mercy. The God who forgives sin doesn't have to stop being that way to turn and be the God who judges the wicked. That brings up this huge cognitive dissonance because we can't see how those go together. But this is where talking to God and the knowledge of God is so important in shaping our doctrine. Because if we're just looking at raw events, we're just looking at raw concepts without connecting it to, okay, who is doing this stuff, it's really hard to see how the God who, in the person of His Son, forgives this woman condemned of adultery. But you flip back to Hosea, and he's ranting, as it seems, against Israel for her harlotry and her unfaithfulness to him as a husband. It's like, how can this be the same person? Well, rather than looking at the events and trying to reconcile the events and map that back onto a simple picture of God that we're comfortable with, we have to learn how to take the nature of God into the events and see, okay, God, what are you thinking about this? What are you feeling about this? Why are you doing these things in this way? I'll explain what I mean. Like, if in some random context you see some random person you don't know and they are just steaming mad about something, you'd be like, whoa, that's an angry person. I don't think I want to have anything to do with that. You got them a wide berth. Don't make eye contact because, you're just not sure what to make of this person. But imagine the sweetest, gentlest, most patient, most kind person you know. Take a minute, get that person in your head. Imagine that person. You walk into the room and they are steaming mad over something. Something's up. Somebody did something to them or to someone they loved. Something really wrong has happened because you know this person and they don't just get angry. Well, we've got to look at the judgments of God that way. We don't look at them and go, if you're so merciful, how could you do da-da-da-da-da? Like, you are merciful. You are kind. You are good. And it's come to this. You gave your own son for sinners. Like, you were willing to pay the ultimate price to save the world. And you're judging them with this kind of fury. Lord, what has happened on the earth? Because it shows how small we tend to think about this stuff if we see God judging the earth and we have to fight assuming that the problem is with God. When we know what he's like, if he is gracious and compassionate and slow to anger, what is the earth like that he's actually provoked to anger? If he's abounding in love and he desires all men to be saved, what is going on if he is moved to reach out in judgment and shake the nations? Like, it's serious because he is merciful. He is kind. In fact, he's so merciful and so kind that he's not willing to abandon us to the hand of wickedness forever. He's not willing to let us continue unchecked in our sin forever. It's the same principle we see at the Tower of Babel, where the earth is united to build a tower to heaven, which, to us, that seems pretty dumb because you can't reach heaven with a modern skyscraper, much less a ziggurat or whatever kind of tower that they were building in Babel's day. But God reached in and intervened, not because he seriously thought they had a shot of building up to heaven, but he sees the world uniting around a spirituality that's not from him. And in his mercy, he goes, if they keep doing this, nothing is going to be impossible for them. And again, that's not because he's threatened, oh no, they're going to take over my kingdom. Like, that's not going to ever happen. But he recognizes the depths of wickedness that mankind will sink to if we have the ability to just do whatever we want without hindrance. And so he confuses the language. Another example of how God is merciful in the midst of judgment. If we look at the book of Revelation, and I hope to get into this one day, there are 21 distinct numbered judgments that we see being poured out in the book of Revelation, which sounds a little excessive. 21, that's a big number. You start breaking them down one judgment at a time, and none of them are good news. Lord, isn't this a little much? But we know he's merciful, and we look at this, and why does God have 21 judgments? Because he doesn't want to wipe everyone out on the first one. And the longer he's drawing it out, like, that's 21 chances to get the hint before it's too late. 21 ways to shake up the nations and go, are you going to wake up or what? When we see God reach out and judge sin in any context in the prophets, it's not just because, okay, you guys, I've had it up to here, and so he breaks things until he feels better. Do we even remember what sin is? And what it does to us, and what it did to the created order when we let it in? Sin is destruction. Sin is death. Sin is like this cancer that gets its roots into the created order and continues to make it sick until God deals with it once and for all. And it's his kindness that he deals with it. And it's his kindness that he waits, giving the most people possible a chance to actually respond to him in love. So this is a really big topic. It's so much more that can fit in a 10 or 15 minute video, but I want to get it on our radar so we can start shifting how we think about the judgments of God. They're not aberrations in God's character. God doesn't stop being merciful or kind or patient to bring these judgments about. But because we know that God is merciful and he is kind and he is patient, if we've got that written on our hearts, when we look at the judgments of God, it's not, how could you? I don't know if I know what to think of you anymore. It's, I know what to think of you, and you have to, in faithfulness to your nature, you have to respond to the earth in this way. Lord, what do you see? I want to get on your side because I know you, and I know you don't fly off the handle at the slightest insult, and I know that you want people to be saved, and I know that you're love, and I know that you're good. Help me to see your judgments the way that you do, because I know that you're right. Not just in the deferential, okay, well, you're God, so I guess you win, which, I mean, praise the Lord, that's a good starting place. But because we know who we believe in, and we know what he is and isn't like, and that shapes the way we understand what he does on the earth. So that's a really big topic, but that's just some groundwork for when we do talk about the end of the age, when we talk about God's judgments. This always has to be a part of the conversation. He doesn't suspend one attribute to exercise another. He's always good. He's always kind. And his judgments, when we look at them rightly, actually enhance that in our eyes rather than detract from it. So next week, plan is to talk about Psalm 2. Keep this in mind as we do that. If you have any thoughts or questions, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put them in the comments or leave a comment on the website or the Facebook page. In the description are all the ways you can connect with this channel and interact a little bit more with it. I'm Amanda Beatty, and this has been the Interwebercessor channel, and I will see you next week. Bye.